I got some spicy takes today. Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes. This is a talk video, and there's a lot of bluster going on right now in the community about the discrepancy in rewards between the Sith Raid and the new raid, which I find a little myopic. I'm going to be a moderating voice here because what people are not understanding is the nuclear bomb that just went off with purple gear economy, and the masses are still thinking they live in the before times. The community is not factoring in the full context into their calculations. They're looking at solely the raw numbers without understanding what those numbers mean for the economy of gear. Now, there are some legitimate problems that have occurred. We will address those at the end of the video, but we'll begin by putting into context the gear and the economy, a preliminary look at the store value and downstream effects, what I think is the determining factor in doing the new or old raids, then the problems, and we will conclude with looking at the squads I've been using for the raid and the free-to-play gearing of my roster. I'm going to upset some people with this one, but y'all are wrong. What must be understood is what just happened. This is massively more gear than the old raid system, and of better quality because we can now choose. What people are upset with is not that we're getting less gear, because we're not. We're getting way more, is that the old raid is on its face getting more Mark 1 tokens and more Mark 2 tokens than the new raid. We've seen this before with the Get 1 and territory battles. This isn't new, and there are reasons for it, which we'll get to in a moment. But more importantly, what this new reward and currency has done is make Mark 1 tokens worthless, and it's eliminating all value to all low-level gear that is not a Cairo. Stun guns are meaningless. Carbantes, meaningless. Stun cuffs, droid collars, they all don't matter anymore. CG has just told us that the old gear paradigm is over, and all that matters now are relics. CG has just created the most seismic catch-up mechanic for players to very quickly get to Gear 12 with only Kairos causing interruptions, with the only caveat being for new players. In younger guilds, you can also add currencies, zetas, and purple ability mats. Those will also be gate. But the old gear is now irrelevant, and the din circulating the community is premised on that Mark 1 tokens and Mark 2 tokens, and that old gear having value, which it does not. Pretty soon, once the community has fully realized what has just happened, we'll be getting videos about the best conversion rates for Mark 1 tokens into scavenger materials for Relic, which we'll touch on a little bit in a moment. But that's all those Mark 1 tokens are going to be good for. It's getting bronzium wiring, and pretty soon after that, they won't even be good for bronzium wiring anymore because you're going to have more than you'll ever need. There are no hard or easy to gear characters anymore, just hard to Cairo. Nearly everyone is a couple months away from full Gear 12 rosters being the floor. Rosters that look very similar to my own. The old raid exists solely to juice young rosters as quickly as possible to engaging with relics and late game content. It's so a new player and young guild don't have to wait 1 to 3 years before they are participating at a level closer to more mature rosters. The Sith Raid is designed to be left behind quickly, so any mature guild and developed roster returning to it is wasting their time. The rewards are early game content only. They do not matter to mature rosters. After a month of the new raid, you won't even think of that gear anymore. Now let's put this into some context. With the length of raids, we can run 2 per week. With the amount of Mark 1 tokens, with just the tier 1 crate, that's about 7,000 Mark 1 tokens and 1,500 Mark 2 tokens when you factor in a nominal amount of personal rewards in the 1.5 to 1.7 million range, which is pretty conservative. And this is the key part in terms of gear and Mark 1 tokens. That's roughly 350 stun guns a raid, 700 stun guns a week, or 2,800 stun guns a month. And that's just the new raid quantities, not the Sith Raid. Stun guns are worthless because at that rate, at the rate that you are gearing, you will be stopped by credits, Kairos, ability mats, zetas, long before purple gear is going to be stopping you. The difference in Mark 1 tokens is moot. The advantage of roughly 1,000 a raid isn't meaningful to gearing at those numbers and at that rate. What will happen instead with Mark 1 tokens is after you gear your roster up to Gear 12, it will solely be used for converting into bronzium wiring. And pretty soon after that, like we said a moment ago, you're not going to be concerned about bronzium wiring anymore. That is also going to become meaningless. With Mark II tokens, the difference is more meaningful, but the ecosystem and full context comes into play here, because the rate of Mark II token accumulation will far outstrip your ability to accrue kairos, which means you'll also max out on Mark II tokens and just be spending them to free up cap and to get ahead on certain pieces. There is no issue here. Kairos are the gate, not Gear 12 plus materials. But this is where the entire ecosystem comes into play, because the value of Mark II tokens does not exist in a vacuum. Mark I tokens and Mark II tokens have altered the value of all currencies and all stores, as well as crystals within the game. We'll do a separate video on this with more detail very soon, but the briefest of overviews, like any store, there's good deals and bad deals. Part of the fun here, though, is parsing all that out and figuring out this marketplace. But here's the big reason why CG has reduced tokens in the Dragon Raid. They don't want to destroy the economy of scavenger materials. There's a balance here, and they don't want to do to relics what they just did to purple gear. Because the Sith Raid will let you relic characters faster, but you'll be stuck at low relics, and the crunch will occur at higher levels. The Dragon Raid will let players focus on higher level relics without completely breaking the ecosystem of lower level relics. If you're good at gearing, you don't want things to be too easy for your opponents anyway. That's your advantage. And for me, that was one of my best advantages, and it just disappeared. Now with the Mark I tokens, your first goal is to take every character that applies to the raid to Gear 11. Once that's done, take them all to Gear 12. Then take the rest of your roster up to Gear 11, and then Gear 12. There's a bunch of reasons for it. We won't really get into it right now, but it's to prep your roster for the future. Don't keep making the same mistakes and chasing the game. Try to get ahead of the game. From there, you're basically done with Mark I tokens. You've won that part of the game. You will now convert them into bronzium wirings until they no longer mean anything. And then you can use some of your Mark I tokens for shard shop currency a little bit. Because at the top here, we do have some of these raid characters that are purchasable with Mark I tokens. I think if they don't fix this portion here, which we'll touch on later, that's another thing they can do, is expand the amount of characters that are purchasable with Mark I tokens. Now, Mark II tokens. Now they really need to make this more navigable and have these icons be clear to understand, because it's always unclear what's a Mark II, what's a Mark I token. You have to scroll forever. That needs to be changed. But with the Mark II tokens, here are your goodbyes. The Fusion Furnace, the Data Pad, one you don't see is the HoloLens. You need those three pieces way more than any other Mark XII gear piece. Those are super common, super high demand, and these are a decent price. This is going to be a pretty effective way to buy these things. Also worth considering is the thermal detonator, and it's because this piece converts very well. I think into the Zinbittle, it might be the impulse detector, but it converts very well with the scavenger, and that's another decent price depending on where you are with Mark III tokens. The other items that I want to acknowledge but you should not purchase, take a look at the Mark 8 security scanner, the Mark 7 hyposyringe. These are bad deals, but you do need a ton of these, so keep those items in mind. And then the stun cuff, not as good of a deal, still a pretty decent deal, and you don't need them as high of a rate though, so it's less of an issue. Now with the Mark III tokens, we start being able to appreciate all the downstream effects from this new store. The Zinbittle card, impulse detectors, these used to be better purchased with crystals along with the keypad. What's happening now is the Zinbittle card, impulse detector are now pretty good buys with your Mark III tokens, which means your crystals are no longer competing against the keypad. You have now freed up crystals to be solely focused here, and that in effect becomes easier to purchase. Now, Arrow Magnifier, this is probably going to be the best place to purchase this as well. So if you didn't have the opportunity to hoard as many as me, you'll have to get them out of here as well. It's not a terrible purchase, but it's not as good as it was. But that's what this token is about. This token is about taking your roster from middle relics to the high relics with far more ease. We'll be able to play in the later portions of the territory battles much more effectively. As we progress through these other stores, we're going to see other downstream effects, so not just the keypad and the crystals, because some players would buy the keypad here with the Get 3. That's not going to be something you're going to want to do anymore. It's going to be that much easier to focus your Get onto Kairos with the Get 3 here, but also you're going to want to supplement your Cairo purchase here with your Get 2. That will speed those along. Sometimes these you could consider as a buy. Now I wouldn't really consider it. You want to just use that stuff on your Kairos. Your Get 1 though, you have a little bit more freedom. This med pack you need an insane amount of. You basically need double med packs of all the other pieces. So of like this Nubian scanner. The way to think about this is if you need 800 Mark 8 Nubian scanners, you need 1600 of these. You need an insane amount of these. So now you no longer have to use Get 1 on stun guns, on all of these other pieces. That is done, which means all of these Gear 12 pieces are now easier to purchase. It means you can afford to grab a multi-tool, which I would have considered a poor purchase before. You can grab a Nubian scanner, which for me was not always a buy in this store. We are now a little bit more free, and it makes that stuff in effect cheaper. Same thing with the Grand Arena store. Some of these pieces, I'd sometimes grab pieces here, but I would just be grabbing Kairos. Some of these aren't a terrible deal, but the bigger effect is going to be within the Shard Shop store. I would have bought this stun gun right away before. Never buying a stun gun out of here again. All of these pieces down here, I would have considered, like this comlink would have been a buy for me. Done buying the comlink. That's a terrible deal now. Same thing with the biotech. All those things are no longer a buy. These 360s, almost all of these are a buy. This one's definitely a buy. Tactical data is not really a problem. You can see I don't have a dot on it. It's because not that many characters use it, so that one I'll skip. But normally the Mark 12 piece in this slot I would grab. But now these other pieces, these other Mark 12 pieces, some of these start becoming a little easier because the Shard Shop currency is going to have less competition. And if it has less competition, it means it's a little bit more affordable. I usually wouldn't buy any of these 720s. I would now consider this one. The keypad is really useful in the scavenger, which we'll hit in a moment. The other thing with the Shard Shop currency is datacrons. You have now less competition, which means it is easier to spend your Shard Shop currency here in the datacron store to help juice that aspect of your game. And I know players want to ignore it, but ignoring datacrons is like ignoring mods. It's not a smart play. Now, very quickly, at least in my initial glances, the Mark 1 tokens are not going to help the Carbonite circuit board. This you're still going to want to farm or deal with it in some fashion. I would like donations to supplement this in some way. I'd like them to up that number. Bronzium wiring, there aren't great conversion rates here, but the conversion rates aren't going to matter. You're going to have a dumb amount of these, and you're going to be able to get a lot of these over time. This will cease to be an issue. Chromium transistor is going to be easier than ever. It was already pretty easy if you used the guild store and grab these pieces. You're not going to need to be as strategic with the store anymore. Heatsink, you're now going to be able to utilize all sorts of pieces for the heatsink, although the HoloLens was always the best deal. Now you can just throw in a bunch of other pieces. This conductor, I like to purchase all this stuff, like all these items here. This is all Shard Shop. That's still going to be, I think, my preferred way to do things. But we will be able to grab a lot of the stuff with the Get currency. I would look at some of that Get 1 with these pieces. Zinbittle card, this is why I was highlighting the keypad and the thermal. Those are not used too often. Like the thermal, well, let me unlock this. The thermal, we can't do it right now. Or can I do it here? Yeah, so with the keypad, you can see not too many characters take it. Same deal with the thermal, it's even fewer. Those are pieces that if you pick up, you can convert into Zinbittle cards at a decent rate. This HoloLens, though, was the piece I was saying that you are going to want to buy with Mark II tokens, but you do not want to convert these. You need a ton of these. Impulse detectors, these pieces, kind of a buy. A little bit more expensive. They weren't as cheap as some of the other pieces, but you don't have as much competition for them. you can convert it into, and the Mark III token is going to be a decent way to supplement this as well. But we will have future videos on this stuff where we can fine tune what is going to be the best deals. Now the keypad, you could look at the stun gun, but I still think crystals is going to be the best way to acquire these, because both the data pad and the fusion furnace, these you cannot use for scavenger materials. You need way too many of them. Stun gun, I'd have to double check the rate, but I don't think it was that good. The argument that the Sith Raid is better is predicated on the premise that the old gear still matters. If your guild is debating doing the old raids, you're literally chasing gear that's worthless. For mature players and guilds, there is no point to doing it. If it weren't for the scavenger, they could make it 1,000,000 tokens. It's junk. It's like dollars after the apocalypse. Hoard all the cash you want, but bottle caps are the currency now, and you're not getting that in the old raid. The determining factor for whether your guild does the Dragon Raid or not is if the majority of your guild can field 5 teams at the level 0 modifier and get max or near max points, which is pretty achievable. Something in the range of 1.5 to 1.7 million per player is enough to make this raid a good deal. The Krayt is a non-factor because those Mark 1 and Mark 2 tokens are going to lose value incredibly fast. If your guild has that majority of players that can complete those 5 attempts, it's going to be worth doing. 300k on 5 attempts is 1.5 million. With full participation, that's 75 million. That's the tier 2 Krayt, better than the estimates that I was doing at the front of the video, which was based on tier 1 Krayts, which you'll end up with without full participation by your guild or guildmates. The 300k is not a big deal. That's the level 0 modifier, and pretty achievable by a lot of those Gear 11 squads, and most players are going to have some relic options to push those averages higher if you can apply those modifiers. It just becomes that much easier to justify the raid. What the Sith Raid will do is take a roster up to that Gear 12 floor and to low relics quickly. What the Krayt Dragon does is get you to high relics. And high relics is what you should be doing, because what CG is saying with these rewards is that that high relics is the game now. That's all that matters. If your guild can't field enough teams, then do the Sith Raid. Let your guild know the goal, and when you hit the majority of players, shift to the Dragon Raid, because there are going to be downsides to doing the Sith Raid too long. Less engaged players who aren't obsessive enough to have found a small fringe YouTube channel, are just going to ignore those characters until you are doing the Dragon Raid, which means the longer you put off the Krayt Dragon, you'll never get ready. Your guildmates won't prep those teams, your guild won't learn the mechanics, and your guild will be delaying currency that actually matters now. The Mark III tokens far longer than everyone else. Your guild will be delaying currency that actually matters, the Mark III tokens, for far longer, while everyone else gets a head start on you. You'll constantly be in a catch-up position if you delay things for too long. Now, just because I don't think the Krayt Dragon Raid is the problem that is being made into, and that the Mark 1 and Mark 2 tokens are not the problems that I think it is, does not mean that I don't think there were some problems with the implementation of this new raid and this new system. I do think there were a number of oversights, and I do think there are ways that CG can address this and make them a little bit better. The first thing is the Legacy Guild currency. CG has completely nerfed this in a way where I don't think they fully understood the impact. I think they were thinking about players like me, late game players who are just going to convert that solely into shard shop currency and be able to mess with that economy, instead of thinking about newer players where this was a very valuable and important way to develop a roster. This was an incredibly effective way to go after characters like CLS, JTR early in the game without affecting any major farms on Cantina, Light Side, Dark Side nodes. This, I think, is a bias that CG had, thinking about older players, and things like this have happened before. Because with these changes, with the Mark 1 and Mark 2 tokens, players like me will never spend any of this currency on this gear again. It is over. And to exacerbate the problem of legacy guild currency from the old raid system, it's also the loss of credits from the old system. This is really going to hurt new accounts. Credits and purple ability mats are the gate for those accounts of how fast you can develop all these characters. It doesn't matter how quickly you can gear them if you don't have the credits to do it, and this is a massive loss in credits. Raids were going on all the time, and this was a very effective way to account for some of that credit crunch. This is going to make those early game problems way worse. Arrow magnifiers are an issue I want to address, but this is one I don't think CG is going to change. I think this was their intent. They wanted this to happen very purposefully because of what you see here, of how many that players like me have. They don't want this to happen. Because arrow magnifiers, I think, were designed and implemented to be a gate, and they are not one. This is a problem for younger players, and this is another thing that is going to punish and hurt younger players, which is unfortunate because those players have not had the amount of time that I have had to engage with the challenge pit raid and to accumulate this amount of resources. Because what this is like when CG took the gold eyeball component salvage out of the tank raid, if you've been around long enough for that. They took a piece that wasn't a crunch and they made it one by removing it from a raid system. And I think that's what CG wants here, is they want this to be the gate that they had always intended it to be. Now on top of all that is the loss of some Get 1. And these are tough farms that are just going to be made that much worse because if players are developing their rosters faster, they're going to graduate into higher level territory battles faster, even faster than they already are, which is pretty quick, which means any farms related to get currency gets harder. And the raids did help that a little bit. It wasn't a significant amount, but it does add up. It does alleviate some pain. And that is something that is going to slow things down even further as these accounts are maturing faster and faster because of the other moves within the ecosystem. But with all that, I think there are some easy fixes. Now, one fix that is very commonly discussed is that just increase the amount of the legacy guild currency that pays out every day. That's one way to do it, but I think the better way is just to add that currency back to the old raid system. Have the old raids pay out more things that can help younger players, newer players, have that catch-up mechanic as I think it is intended to be. Make it pay out Get 1 so that players have another resource, another source to have that currency accumulate, and add credits back. Arrow magnifiers, I think players are going to need to be strategic about that, but I think the other problems are issues that CG could easily solve just by adding those resources as a raid reward to the legacy raids. But even in that scenario, there's the danger of how quickly you graduate from raids these days. I think credits need to be paid out in some other fashion, possibly. The other issue here that needs to get addressed is donations. Donations are meaningless now. So either this needs to be completely overhauled or gotten rid of. None of this gear really matters anymore. So they should expand that to possibly include Kairos, include maybe scavenger materials, include those carbonite circuit breakers or whatever they're called, include some Gear 12 Plus materials, include maybe some other relic materials. All those things should be considered. Maybe increase the count, increase the numbers so that we can contribute to our guild mates in a way that can be more meaningful. And for some more personal context, here's how my guild performed. This was with a glitch, so really our attempt was closer to the tier 1 crate than the tier 2 crate. I think this is more than fine, and with my personal rewards, this is where I fell. So I was able to get to 3.4, but I think right around this 1.7 range, where you already accumulate a decent amount of Mark II tokens, that's pretty good. If you can get into the 2.2 range, that's even better. And that's going to be a decent amount of resources to start with, and you can build on that foundation. It's going to be pretty quick. You can just stay tuned to this channel, you'll see it. Let me show you the squads I'm using. Here is my squads and the point totals that they achieved. This is something that you're going to be able to build on, or that I'm going to be able to build on pretty quickly, but you can see that a lot of these squads are pretty weak. But once you understand the mechanics, they can get some decent scores. I have the scores here with a level modifier if you want to read through each of that. Some of the junk squads did pretty well. The Old Republic, you're going to want to play like the Malik event, and this was able to max out a score. But you can see that I'm going to take all these characters to Gear 12 very rapidly, and then I was already at 3.6 million. I'll be able to increase on that very fast. But I did have Jabba, and not every player has Jabba. But the game and CG is saying that you need to have Jabba as soon as possible, and it really should be everyone's major project right now, or at least their next project. And as far as GLs go, he's pretty quick to get, pretty fast to achieve, and that is something. There are Hut Cartel teams that are going to do very well. Like you can see this junk Hut Cartel squad I used that was still able to get 200k with some nonsense. A Bosch lead, a in progress Jabba squad is going to probably be able to max out. I would feel that pretty confidently. I'll try that out myself though, even though I've got relics on all those characters. But next steps for me is I am going to get armor, because I did take advantage of the cheese here that is going to be rectified soon. Maybe CG takes some time like they did with the Sith Raid when we had some of those loops, like the Finn loop or the Stormtrooper Han loop. Those were in effect for a little bit. And then I will build on each of these factions as quickly as possible. Tuscans are already at 6 stars, and all of these other additional characters will be incrementally increased basically every raid. Now we'll do our usual wrap up, the free-to-play gearing of my roster. This is the gearing that we did on April 3rd. So now we're only a month behind. We're getting caught up. The big piece of gearing we did in this video, this period, is going to be Admiral Trench. This was right after him being unlocked, and we take him up to Gear 11 right away. I now have him at Relic 7 because the Datacron was the motivation to get him to that level quickly. We drop on all those Zetas. You can see how low I got in Zetas after Afra and Grand Inquisitor and Jabba. I was not prepared for the amount of Zeta consumption that we would be experiencing with all those unlocks. I had for a while, like a year, stopped buying Zetas, maybe even more than a year, with fleet currency. I've gone back. The Trench Datacron so far I'm unimpressed with, but we stop at Gear 11 for this period because I'd like to do Gear 11 testing just to see like what's that floor of participation. Here you can see Clone Wars Chewbacca. I prepped a month before Tarful was released. We knew Tarful was coming. I could not imagine a scenario in which Tarful didn't use Clone Wars Chewie, so he went up right away. Yeah, I'm just double checking all these pieces because there's a lot of Carbantis. He was a Carbanti heavy character, but fortunately for everyone else, you don't got to worry about that stuff anymore. Month of this raid, you will no longer be concerned. So we take those major pieces up, major players up, and getting ready. Looks like I really took my time with this one. I'm taking all these characters up even higher. That's just my floor to calibrate my thinking on all these characters. You can see where the farms are on a lot of these other characters. Now the next item we take care of here is I want to take advantage of my unaligned force users. So I have Cal Kestis and Seer Junda I brought up to Gear 11 in a previous video, did a little testing, and what was pretty clear was my Gear 11 Scav Ray was not sufficient. Seer Junda and Cal Kestis were great. They punch up a ton, they're super tanky. First character to die in basically every match was Rey. Way too weak. She's been a little better at Gear 12. She deserves more investment, but this, at least Gear 12 was like a decent floor. There's a number of characters like that, like Dark Trooper or Mando, where I think like Gear 12 is a better floor than Gear 11, or even like Sith Trooper. There's work on these characters. You're trying to determine where they become usable or not. And Scav Ray needs a little bit more investment than some of these other characters. Like Tuscans, great at Gear 11. Sir June the Calcast is great at Gear 11. And we will wrap it up there. We'll see what the reaction to this video is like. Definitely have a different viewpoint on things, but maybe I've convinced a few of you. Look out for that store video, and we'll have some other videos on squads with the raid in the coming days and weeks. But thank you for watching. Be safe out there, everyone, and be excellent to each other. This is Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.